Hello and welcome to episode 15 of the Cloud Computing for the C-Suite show with Brad Nelson and internationally recognized and world's #1 cloud industry expert and thought leader, David Linthicum. This show is sponsored by Nelson Hilliard, cloud computing recruitment specialists placing great people in cloud, IoT, fintech and AI. This week we're excited to have James Staten as our special guest. James is the global head of marketing at Equinix, one of the world's largest data center providers. James is a cloud expert with 20 years experience in marketing, business development and corporate strategy. Welcome to you both. It's exciting to have you both on the C-Suite show this week.
Thanks so much. It is a pleasure to be here and to talk to your C-Suite executives because they are the ones who need to really drive the changes in their business.
So James, it's great to have him on board. I mean, it's funny, it's all the podcasts I've done on cloud computing, actually for 10 years. And people always ask me, who's your best guest? And it's always by far James here, just because he's able to rattle off a knowledgeable response, not just something that's just a stream of consciousness about most of the topics out there. So he's probably one of the most knowledgeable guys in the business right now. So we're lucky to have him on the video cast.
Yes, I concur. We are very lucky indeed. It's been great. We've just done a great show actually for Australia, haven't we, with the GDPR subject, which has been fantastic.
Yeah, I can't even spell it. James seemed to know all about it. So if you haven't looked up that show, please look it up.
Absolutely right. Well, this week on the Cloud Computing for the C-Suite show, we're actually talking about the pros and cons of migrating to cloud, and should enterprise leadership consider platform consolidation as they move to the cloud? If so, what are the trade-offs? Over to you guys.
Yeah, let me set up the premise, and I'll go ahead and kick it to James because I think he has lots of thoughts on this. And so this is a blog I did on InfoWorld, and the reason I did it was the fact that lots of people out there, my clients, people who read my blog and listen to this show as well, are looking at how much consolidation should occur as they migrate to the cloud. And let me give you a scenario. So in other words, I'm running on in a very heterogeneous set of platforms: Windows, Linux, LAMP stacks, things like that. And I have 20 years of computing, and obviously we're going to leverage different kinds of technologies over the years. So as we migrate to the cloud, should we start consolidating on standard platforms, such as a standard Linux configuration, a standard Windows configuration, things like that. And there's trade-offs in doing it, but there's also advantages in terms of maintenance costs, things like that. And so James, I'll go ahead and kick it to you. So what should be kind of the determination as to whether or not they should actually modify the workloads to run on a standard consolidated platform?
Yeah, well, there's very clear appeal to consolidation of resources and services used across your company. Having been in this industry for more than 20 years, that's really never happened. We have too much appeal that comes from new services and new innovations from alternative choices within these areas that you end up multi-cloud, multi-service, regardless of how you try to standardize. When I was at Sun Microsystems, we ran into this all the time. While we would have loved to have had everybody who used Java just use Sun, they ended up finding cool services from IBM, cool services from BMC, and they ended up with multiple platforms that they managed to maintain. The key thing now in the cloud industry is to realize that there are leading clouds that have very unique services and capabilities and differentiated value propositions they bring. And so you don't want to be thinking about them as my A platform and my B platform and assume that they are 100% compatible with one another, but to realize that there are different services within different clouds that you're going to want to tap into. And so your multi-cloud future is going to be, I use these guys for these purposes, I use those guys for those purposes, and so on down the line. And if you're going to do that, you need to realize that a big part of your multi-cloud reality is to have something that is cloud neutral, that allows you to put certain data, allows you to put certain classes of applications, and put the ability to connect to some of your legacy applications that frankly aren't ready to go into any cloud.
So let me give you a scenario. This is kind of real life. So in other words, I'm going to have there's an enterprise that's migrating just to AWS. They're not going to go to a multi-public cloud at least. And they're going to shut down their existing center. And so they're a colo provider like you provide for say 50 to 30% of their applications out there. in looking at the AWS costs and running on AWS, the ability to leverage a common platform, typically over time in terms of maintenance and operation costs may save them 10 to 20%, but they have to refactor, they have to retest, they have to redeploy, all those great things you do when you port a workload which may be poorly designed from one platform to another. So what kind of things should they consider in terms of the trade-offs between that scenario? So they're not necessarily going to a multi-cloud. In essence, it's kind of what I call pragmatic hybrid cloud, where they're leveraging something to run all the stuff that won't run in cloud, which you guys can run, and they're leveraging a cloud-based platform, and they're trying to figure out how best configure it so it's going to run as cheaply as it can.
So that's definitely the right approach when you're starting down the path for cloud, to start with a standard common platform that you're going to get educated on, because you do need to understand what is involved in securing those cloud connections, what is involved in monitoring and tracking those cloud applications. And when you start to build your hybrid applications that are calling your data warehouse that sits in the colocation facility, or calling some of your legacy applications to bring in some of the historical value you've delivered to your customers, you do want to get that right on the first cloud first. But what we oftentimes see is that customers will say, okay, I'm 100% going AWS, until they suddenly hear from one of their key customers, or they hear from one of their key ecosystem partners who runs on Azure and says, sorry guys, we're not moving to AWS, so you've got to at least start integrating with us. So you could simply do integration with private links between your colocation facility, so that AWS connects to Colo and then Colo connects to Azure. So you could do those kinds of things. But saying that I'm going to walk away and not use Azure at all just made your customer or your partner not important to you. Not a good strategy.
Yeah, you can't cut off any technology in terms of how you're going to encompass it into your existing solutions. So from a colo provider, if you're moving an enterprise over to your infrastructure, and the reason they're going for it, there's not a good analog that's on the cloud, and there's a lot that aren't good analogs on the cloud. So what advice would you give them if they said, James, should I consolidate to a common platform or just go ahead and do an 8A port? So you're providing, systems that I had within my enterprise data center, but now in a colo provider.
Yeah, so they really should think about us in two ways. First, they should be thinking about us not just as colo, but as a digital edge provider as well. Because what you don't want to do is have the historical model of thinking about colocation as I'm going to put all of my non-cloud applications in one cage, in one city, and then I'm going to use WAN connections to give experiences to people all across the globe. Because as we know, if you're going to rely on long-distance WAN connections from Chicago to your customers in London, don't expect the customers in London to have a very good customer experience. It's much better if you come out and say, look, I got customers in Sydney, I got customers in London, I got customers in Tokyo, and I need to have my applications that those customers use, I need them to have a really good local experience. And so what I should be doing is realizing that the public clouds I do business with, they have facilities in those cities, and I can actually also take advantage of co-location capacity in those same cities as well, so that the combined hybrid application we're building has a really good performance between them. Now, there may be some cities where I don't have my cloud provider that I do business with in exactly the same city where I have a co-location cage. In those cases, then you want to start looking at the types of interconnections that can be provided by the colo provider, and do they have the ability for you to have a very fast, very private link to that cloud facility that's closest to that metro. And that was a big reason behind what we call the Equinix Cloud Exchange Fabric, or ECX Fabric, that we announced in November, that allows you to have private interconnections to the AWS, Azure, Google, Oracle, and other cloud facilities that are as close to your location, even if they're not in the same metro.
So what I'm hearing is that heterogeneity isn't really a huge problem. So if we have to deal with heterogeneity, whether in the cloud, the colo, or mixed, and it's obviously going to be a mixed environment that we're moving to, that it's the abstraction layers, the management typically makes those environments, no matter how different they are, easy to run as if we're getting to a common homogeneous platform, which pretty much no one's on.
Yeah, very true. And something that you probably saw recently is a lot of enterprises, as you know, for a long time, have trusted their security to Microsoft's Active Directory. And in the historical early days of cloud, you would not find Active Directory services and capabilities in AWS or Google or other places. Now, at least with AWS, you're seeing their own implementations of Active Directory so that they are 100% compliant. And they most recently announced SSO services so that you can do all the single sign-on capabilities you have in your corporate Active Directory directly into AWS as well now. So they are starting to realize the hybrid multi-cloud world.
So, Brad,
how to make it work well.
Yeah, and I think that having done some courses and implementations on multi-cloud, it's a bit more planning that has to go into it, but it's nothing that's insurmountable, as we start moving forward. So Brad, are you seeing kind of interest in consolidation of platforms, as you're placing people, or do they, companies really kind of realize that, well, we got a huge heterogeneous systems now, and going forward, we're going to be hugely heterogeneous, so therefore we're going to have to hire, 20 different skills versus 10 different skills?
It's a great question, Dave. It goes back actually to one of our previous shows where we're talking about expectations and what's been identified from a point of view of the client's needs and where they need to either skill up or train people and where their strengths are in that. So there has been conversations around where they're going to place their technologies, how are they going to combine everything. I haven't seen a huge amount at the moment personally. But I think it's definitely a conversation that's being had at the board level, or sorry, the C-suite level management of where they're going to place things. But I think essentially it really is understanding what they need and why they need it and what their strengths are already, without having to flip from one platform to the other. That seems to be where I see things at the moment.
So James, close this out here. So what words of advice would you give companies that are looking at the consolidation question? And so in other words, what are the top 5 questions they should answer? What are, some of the general rules of thumb in terms of the direction they should go? What should they watch out for? What's kind of the elevator pitch for this?
Sure. So first and foremost is that every CIO in the IT organization should realize that they alone do not get to determine what cloud services their company is going to use. The likelihood today in 2018 is that their company's already using lots of different cloud services, and IT was not involved in making that decision. So their very first step should be to identify what cloud services are already in use in my company. The second thing they should do is realize, how can I make sure that of the cloud services we're doing business today, which ones are we able to ensure we can protect our personally identifiable information and our key intellectual property, and make sure that the IT team knows this information so that they can really empower the rest of the company to use these services. The second thing that they should be paying attention to is that when you train someone to be a specialist in managing or administering Amazon Web Services, for example, that person is probably not the right person to train on how to use Azure, because there's enough difference between how those two environments work that you're probably going to need a separate Azure specialist. So that's the second thing you should think through. And this is going to be true of a lot of the other cloud services that you use as well. Then the third thing you should do is realize that since you're going to be multi-cloud and hybrid cloud, there's a key role for your network administrator to play to enable the direct connections between your colocation cage or your data center and each of the cloud services you're using, and determine when we can use an internet connection, what kind of encryption should be applied when we do that, and when we should be using a private interconnection between them. Those should be the first 3 steps. And then the fourth step is for all of IT to realize that and take on an attitude of, I'm here to help our business drive our digital business forward using cloud services. I am not the Department of No. I am not the guys who are going to say, you can't use this cloud service. We didn't approve that cloud service. They have to realize those decisions have already been made and are likely to still be made without them unless they can change that attitude and how their business views them.
Wow, that's a great way to put it. Thank you for that. So, Brad, back to you.
That was fantastic. Very well said, James. Thoroughly enjoyed that. And guys, I've really enjoyed this week's C-Suite show. Thanks for both being a part of it.
Happy to do it. Great to have James here.
And thanks for having me, guys. It's a pleasure to be a part of this great show.
Fantastic. It's a pleasure to have you, James. It really is. Well, thanks for watching, everyone. We really hope you enjoyed watching this week's C-Suite show. It covers some very interesting points there. I'm sure you'll agree. You can reach James on Twitter if you've got any further questions, which is @Staten7. And David's on Twitter also, which is @DavidLinthicum. And myself on Twitter @Nelson_Hilliard. So thanks again for watching, everyone. We hope you did enjoy that. And remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future shows. Thanks very much for watching.